Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi everyone. Peace be upon you all. Thank you for coming and welcome to this rare Muslim-Jewish dialogue between the Jewish Society and the Ahmadiyya Muslim Students Association. Before I begin, can I check where you can hear me okay? We hope that this is just the beginning of further interfaith cooperation and dialogue between our societies and indeed many of the different faith groups across Imperial. Reverend Andrew Willson will be speaking about interfaith dialogue more in a moment, but before we do so, I'd like to introduce the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, since some of you may not have heard of it, our respected speakers here today, and the topic at hand. The Ahmadiyya Muslim community is a fast-growing international revival movement within Islam. By the grace of God, it is the single largest Muslim community in the world, with tens of millions of adherents united in both belief and practice under the hand of a single Khalifa, a single spiritual leader. The community was founded by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, peace be upon him, whom Ahmadi Muslims take to be the promised Messiah and divine reformer, awaited by all major religions and Islam's essentially. He claimed that he was commissioned to bring Muslims back to the true original teachings that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, taught, to spread the peace and tolerance that the true Islam teaches, and to reconnect man with a living God who hears as he always did and speaks as he always done. The motto of the community is love for all, hatred for none. The views of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community on certain issues diverge from that of Orthodox Islam. However, we firmly believe that this interpretation is fully grounded in authentic Islamic source material. But regardless of different views, we hope that a peaceful interfaith gathering like today will allow people of different perspectives to engage with one another in a respectful and civilized manner, so that even if beliefs aren't changed, attitudes might be. Our topic today is how to find God. This is a topic that needs little introduction, as does the essence and the core of all religion and spirituality. Each and every faith claims to have the way to God, but how to truly find Him and what that means is the subject of discussion today. Undoubtedly, there will be some differences that arise, but there is scarcely any forum better than today's to discuss these differences and similarities in our conception of God and how we believe we can find Him. To speak to us today on some of these questions, we are very fortunate to have two experienced and knowledgeable speakers. Representing a Jewish perspective, we have Rabbi Gavin Broder. He is London's Jewish student chaplain, as well as the former chief rabbi of Ireland. So thank you very much for joining us today. Representing the perspective of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, we have Tal Qudus Ahmed. He is a youth coordinator of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Youth Association, published Arabic teacher, and has studied theology and comparative religions for 8 years at both the Ahmadiyya Institute of Theology and Languages and at Haysbrook College. So I'd like to extend a warm welcome to both of our guests. And we also have Reverend Andrew Willson, who's kindly agreed to chair the question and answer session. He's from Imperial Chaplaincy, and I'll just move to him in a minute. But before I do so, I'd like to also thank the Jewish Society for their cooperation on this event and for co-hosting it. And now I'll tell you a bit about the format. We're going to have two 20 to 25 minute talks, followed by a question and answer session for as long as the audience keep asking questions. And our subject today is very broad, so feel free to ask broader questions and use this opportunity. So after the question and answer session, we'll have light refreshments. We have enough to feed the whole campus here, so please dig in afterwards. And then in that time, we'll have more informal discussions. But now I'll pass you on to Andrew, who's going to speak about interfaith dialogue, and then we'll begin our first talk. So, Reverend Andrew Willson.
Thank you very much. This is by way of setting the tone and just providing some inspiration about dialogue. Yes, you can see two great blue triangles behind me. In the summer, I went to a conference of university chaplains at Yale in America, and Ibo Patel was the speaker there. One of the speakers. He's the founder of the Interfaith Youth Corps based in Chicago, and it's the main, I think, interfaith student organization in America. And it aims to promote dialogue, understanding and shared voluntary action between people of different faiths. Now what I really liked from his talk was this simple idea of the triangle. And what he said was that the more time he spent doing dialogue with people, it was as if there were three sides of a triangle. And if we have a positive attitude and we know somebody of a different faith perspective from ourselves, so attitudes, relationships, we're likely to pick up a little bit of detailed knowledge. And the more knowledge we have, that might enhance our positive attitude and so deepen our relationship. And we move around the triangle a few times. So it doesn't really matter whether you don't know anybody and you know a little bit of knowledge, because then that will make your relationship just a little bit deeper when you meet somebody. Or if you've met somebody, you can find out a little bit more. You can deepen your knowledge by asking questions and listening. And our attitudes can be informed and enriched. And of course, go around the triangle a few times with the person you already know and find out about their faith opens us and gives us more positive attitudes to try the same process with people who we meet who we don't know anything about their faith. And you can translate it out of faith. You can use this with people who have more philosophical beliefs. You could try it with people who have political beliefs that are very different from our own as well. So just by way of conclusion, I hope that in the listening to the talks and in the question and answer, you can start to see yourself travelling around the triangle in a positive way, sharing accurate and positive knowledge and building good relationships and deepening a positive attitude. My final comment is really to say that dialogue doesn't mean agreement. Dialogue is learning to be with people whose views are very different from our own, if not directly contradictory at times, and for that to be okay. And it's something we can practice and get more skilled at, because it requires a kind of emotional stability and a generosity of heart and a commitment, if you like, an ethical, political commitment to enter into dialogue. Nobody's expecting anybody to agree with people whose views are different from themselves. But what we are hoping is that we will understand in a deeper way, more accurately, and have a positive view and able to live with difference and use it really creatively. So welcome to this event. We hope you get some really good positive understanding and your attitudes are enhanced and your relationships develop as well. So do stay for the informal part, for the grapes and the juice, because then you can go around the triangle another time. Okay, I'll finish there. And we're going to, first of all, invite Rabbi Gavin to share his thoughts and present on this question, how can we find God, how to find God from a Jewish perspective. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you and welcome, and thank you for such a warm welcome. And I can only second what has just been said, and it certainly is commendable that it has been an evening like tonight has been organized in order that we can get together and can discuss. What I want to do is to take a few texts and to look at them from a Jewish perspective and perhaps get a little understanding about the topic which we are speaking about tonight. It also happens to be particularly relevant because we are fast approaching the Jewish festival of Passover, and it is about that event, the Exodus, that I want to focus on at the beginning. The Jewish people find themselves in Egypt. There's drought, there's famine, and they've all come down as a family, and they're there in Egypt where they're growing and multiplying. It comes a time, however, where the Egyptians fear, Pharaoh fears, that the Jewish people are going to be a problem if another nation attacks. And therefore he enslaves them, and he tries to do everything which he can in order that they should not increase. He then further concerned that they're going to have a leader who's going to take them out and who's going to fight against the Egyptians as well. So the Bible tells us about the sequence of events and how he enslaves them, how he makes them work hard. At that point in time, Moses, who was born in Egypt, has fled away, and God appears to him, and God says to him, I want you to return, I want you to go to Pharaoh and say that you've had a word from God, the Jewish people are now going to leave Egypt. I'm not going to go through the whole story, but briefly. Moses comes down, he meets with Aaron, his brother, and he goes to Pharaoh and asks that the Jewish people should be released. And Pharaoh says, no, I don't know why I should believe in your God. I've never heard of your God. Why should I let the people out? And he sees this as an act of the Jewish people not wanting to be part of his society. He enslaves them, he makes them work hard. And the more that Moses goes along and asks for the Jewish people to be released, the harder he enslaves, the harder he makes the people work. Eventually, God brings along plagues. 10 plagues which try and show that God is there is a presence, and the Jewish people are going to leave. And plague after plague after plague, Moses goes to Pharaoh, some of them he warns him, this is going to take place, let the Jewish people out. And Pharaoh says no. The plague comes about, and Pharaoh calls Moses and says, stop the plague, the Jewish people can go out. And as soon as the plague stops, Pharaoh changes his mind again and does not release the people. Until eventually after the 10th plague they finally leave. And I'll come back onto that later. What is interesting at this point in time is that it must have been quite evident to Pharaoh, quite evident to the Egyptians, that there is a God and that his people are being taken out of Egypt. And one would imagine that nobody would want to fight against the Jewish nation at that moment in time. There is, however, one nation that does, the Amalekites. And the Amalekites come and they fight against Israel. And the Jewish sources tell us that the reason that Amalek, the Amalekites, were able to fight against the Jewish people is because they, the Jewish people, did not have full belief in God. They turned around after a number of days and turned around and said, is there a God amongst us? Is there a God? Is there somebody who's looking after us? Is there an all-being? Is there a power? And the question is an obvious question. Even if we want to suggest that the Amalekites didn't believe in God, how is it possible that the Jewish nation didn't believe in God at that moment in time? And our sources tell us that because they didn't have such belief, that's why the Amalekites were able to attack. And it's explained with a parable. The parable tells of a father who's carrying his son on his shoulders and is going through the marketplace. And they're busy walking, and the son is sitting on top, and he sees a beautiful apple, and he says to his father, Dad, please will you get me an apple? And the father buys him an apple. They go a little bit further, and he sees a pear. He says, please will you buy me a pear? And the father buys him a pear. And he sees a toy, etc., etc. He sees different things in the marketplace, asks his father, and the father buys it for him. And then they're busy passing another person in the street, in the marketplace, and the son says to the man, have you seen my father? And the father gets angry, takes his son and says, after all I've done for you, don't you know that I exist? Don't you know that I'm looking after you? Takes his son, puts him down, and the son gets bitten by a dog. As soon as he gets bitten by a dog, he puts his arms out and he runs to his father and says, Daddy, Daddy. The father says, now you realize who I am. And the parable and the message is that so too with the Jewish nation when they were going through the desert. They were given everything. God was providing for them. And they were given manna to eat, and they were given water to drink. And everything was there for them, and they got so used to it, they still said, is there a God amongst us? And that's when the Amalekites were able to attack the Jewish nation. And we have to ask the question, how is it possible that the Jewish nation did not know that there was a God? They'd seen the plagues that had happened in Egypt. They'd been given the Bible on Mount Sinai. 600,000 men, apart from women and children, came out from Egypt. They were provided for. Manna came down from heaven, they had no want of food. They didn't have to change their clothes. They didn't have, because the manna was a spiritual food, they didn't even need to go to the bathroom. Where did they get water from? So the Bible tells us that there was a rock, and Moses was told to hit the rock, and it provided water. Now water wasn't just a drop of water for a couple of people. It was for at least 3 million people. Probably 3 million gallons of water a day. For all those years that they were in the desert. That being the case, seeing all these miracles, how could they possibly deny that there is a God? And the answer is that there are levels of belief. Now, they go up in stages. It's very easy, I think, for most people to understand that there's a creator of the world. It came into being somehow. The second level is the understanding that God is involved, not just in creation, but He's involved in a day-to-day with our lives as well. The third level, understanding that God knows a person's inner thoughts. And finally, probably the most difficult level is understanding that God knows and is running my life as well. What does that mean? We just had a festival a week ago, the festival of Purim. The festival of Purim tells us, and we read about the scroll of Esther, in which we are told about how there's a king, Ahasuerus, he has a prime minister, Haman, who wants to get rid of the Jewish people. And the Jewish people are saved. Says one of the great rabbis that this time was the happiest time for the Jewish people. Why so? And he brings another parable as well. He says like this. There was a king who sends his son, the prince, away. He wants him to get a life experience. But unbeknown to the son and unbeknown to the prince, the king is still interested in the boy's life, in the prince's life. And he sends along some people, an entourage of people, some officers, some soldiers that are going to protect him. But the son doesn't know it. And the son goes out into the world, goes out into the fields, and he's attacked by a bear. And as the bear is coming close, suddenly there's a shot. There happens to be somebody in the area, and the bear is killed. He goes a little bit further, and he's attacked by a lion, and the same thing happens. A few days later, he's attacked by some armed robbers, and again, people happen to be there, and they protect him. And at that point in time, the prince turns around and says, wait, something is going on over here. It's not just a coincidence. Yes, maybe a bear, a one-off, that can happen. Maybe a lion, but 3 occasions, more occasions, for me to be saved at that last moment in time, there must be something that's happening over here. And he realizes that his father is looking after him. And what's interesting about the festival that we just had, the scroll of Esther, that if one looks carefully, one sees that God's name is not mentioned in the scroll. A story which took place over 9 years. And if you read the story, it's a great story. It's a wonderful read. And it makes for a good book. It is a good book. But as we go along, one can say that these are just a series of natural events that take place. And I'll leave you to read the story. A series of natural events that takes place. God's name is not mentioned in that scroll. Only, says the rabbi, afterwards, when you look at the whole thing in its entirety, those 9 years, and you see the whole picture which is formed, you say it cannot have happened unless God had orchestrated it. Now, I'm sure that we've all got our own personal stories that reflect that. Because I think it happens in all our lives. And I'll just tell you of something personal, a story which happened to my wife and myself. We were just married, we were having our first child. And as I suppose lots of anxious mothers, they want to know that everything's going according to plan. And one evening, it was late night, and she felt that I must go to the hospital, I want to have a checkup. We got into the car, and off we went, to the local hospital. And we were waiting, as you do. And all of a sudden, I saw there a child, a boy and a girl, walking around, and the boy was wearing a skull cap. Now this was unusual, it was out of the way. There was unlikely to be any other Jewish people there. And backwards and forwards, a young boy and a young girl. So I went up to them and I said, what's happening? So they said to me in Hebrew, our mother's been brought into hospital. So I went up to the doctor and I said, can I be of any assistance? I understand that you've got a Jewish patient. He said, thank you so much for coming. We've got a woman over here who's been taken off the plane at Heathrow on her way from Israel to America. She's had some internal bleeding. She doesn't speak English. It'd be great that you can help. So I went in and I spoke with her and I related what was happening between her and the doctor. She was going to stay overnight. She did stay overnight. What was going to happen to her two children? The son and the daughter. And I said to the mother, I'd be happy to take them home. She did not know me at all. She gave me her children. She gave me her passports, including her own, and she gave me all the money that she had. And I took those children home. Now, my wife actually never got seen that night. But for some reason we happened to be there and it served a purpose. A personal story, how we look at the greater picture and somehow it tells us that there is a higher being, somebody is orchestrating something. During the Exodus, when the Jewish people came out of Egypt, they saw water coming out of a rock. They saw the 10 plagues. They saw all the miracles that were happening. How could we possibly suggest, and how could they possibly have said, is there a God? And the answer is that the people saw many miracles, but they didn't internalize it. They saw a series of events, and it's very easy to see a series of events and to say, it just happenstance. Not because there's a God, not because anybody's orchestrating it, it just happened. It just happened. When the Jewish people saw all this water day after day coming out from the rock, they believed in miracles. They saw miracles, but they didn't attribute it to there being a God, that it was a God that was giving them that water. And very often, I think that that's what's lacking in our lives, and that's what stops us from finding God or realizing that there is a God. Because we just go about our daily lives, and we see things happening all the time, we don't say that it's because of God. You know, I don't know, I'm sure other religions, many religions, and those who are not religious either, or maybe not so, will turn around and, you know, something happens, you say, you know, thank God. You know, we say it like an automatic jerk reaction. Thank God. You know, this happened, you know, I had an exam, and just the question that I was studying, it happened. Thank God. And very often we just say that just as a reaction, not with the realization that we're actually attributing it to God. But that is in actual fact what is happening. And I think that's the reason that a lot of people don't find God is because either they're not looking for God, or because they don't actually take a step back and look at the greater picture of themselves, of their family, of their friends, and of the greater world. Would you like me to carry on?
You've got time? 5 minutes. Okay. We'll just bring it up to 20.
How does one create that relationship with God? Let me take you back again to Egypt. And here the Bible, in explaining what happened just before the Jewish people left, tell us an interesting series of events, and I think for the Jewish students, a wonderful thing to mention at the Passover Seder in a few weeks' time. I saw an interesting idea a couple of nights ago, which is obvious but hadn't struck me. Following the 9 plagues, God tells Moses there's going to be a 10th one, the death of the firstborn of the Egyptians. And after that, they will let the Jewish people go. And God turns around to Moses and he instructs him about this. And tells them just before this plague takes place, what I want you to do is on the 10th of the month, I want everybody to take a lamb into their homes. You will keep it. You will make sure that it is perfect. And then, on the designated time, on the 14th of the month, I want you to slaughter this animal and take its blood and put it on the doorposts. After which, says God, I will pass over the land of Egypt on that night, and I will smite the firstborn of the Egyptians, both man and beast. And this is going to be a sign that the blood on the doorpost is a sign that that's a Jewish house, and God will pass over those houses. God instructs that to Moses. Moses then goes and relates that to the people. And they did as God had commanded. And it happened on that night, at midnight, God passed over, and the Egyptian firstborn died. And then the verse tells us something which I want to focus on. When that happened at midnight, when all those firstborns died, including the firstborn of Pharaoh, the verse says, and Pharaoh arose at night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great outcry in Egypt, for there was no house which no one was dead. And at that point he turned around and says, let the people go. What to me is so interesting is that the verse says, and Pharaoh arose at night. You know what that means? Let's put it into a perspective. 9 plagues, horrific plagues had taken place in Egypt. Each time Moses had gone to Pharaoh, this plague is going to happen. And it happens. And Pharaoh says, take away the plague, I'll let you go. And then he changes his mind. Plague after plague. It's going to happen, and it happens just as God says. Before the 10th plague, Moses goes along to Pharaoh and says, Pharaoh, he says, there's going to be another plague, and then you're going to let the people out. You know what the plague's going to be? It's going to be the death of the firstborn. You've got a choice. You can let us out now. And Pharaoh, at that moment in time, what was he thinking? It's not going to happen. It's happened 9 times already. It's my son that's going to be involved. He doesn't let the people out, but that I'm not so interested in. You know what he does? He goes to sleep. The verse says, and when it happened, Pharaoh arose at night. Pharaoh arose, means he went to sleep. I'm not bothered. I'm not bothered. How is that possible? How is that possible? The thing is that he wasn't the only one that went to sleep. Much earlier in the Bible, it tells us that God asked Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac. And God says to him quite clearly, I want to take your son, the one that you love. I want you to take Isaac, and I want you to go away the land, and I want you to bring him up there as a sacrifice. And the next verse says, and Abraham arose early in the morning. Put yourself once again into that position like we did with Pharaoh. You're going to sacrifice your son tomorrow. What do? What do? You sit there nervous, you go contact your chaplain, you go to sleep. And one further case, that of Jonah. The story of Jonah, where he flees away because he's given a message from God. He flees away, and there he finds himself on a ship, and the ship is there, and the wind is blowing, and the sea is churning. There's a mighty tempest, and the ship is threatened to be broken up. That's the words of the verse. And the sailors were frightened, and each one cried out to their God, and they cast the cargo over in order to lighten the ship. And Jonah goes down to the bottom of the ship, goes to sleep. Goes to sleep. And the captain wakes him up and he says, why are you sleeping? Call out to your God. Perhaps your God will answer us. How can you fall asleep? And how do we explain this? Pharaoh, Abraham, Jonah, faced with a crisis, and they go to sleep. Very different reactions. And the answer is that It depends upon your personal relationship to God. We've spoken about how you find God. How do I get that personal relationship? And the answer is that if you internalize it and you get the whole being and you understand that there's a God, and that becomes part and parcel of you, then there can be an equilibrium. That you can find your inner peace, you can find contentment, and you can find happiness. So therefore, Abraham and Jonah on one hand understood who God was, they saw the holiness of it, and therefore if he instructs them to do something, to sacrifice Abraham, to sacrifice Isaac, Jonah that he's going to be caught up in the tempest in the sea, then he can go to sleep, because he knows that that's what God has orchestrated, and that's how it's going to happen. Pharaoh, on the other hand, he hadn't internalized this, so he could do it with the other perspective and completely throw it out of his mind. So what I've tried to show from a few of the texts is how one can and should maybe approach life and approach understanding of who God is. And I think that if we were to be honest with ourselves, if individuals were honest with themselves and they would take a step back, then first of all I think they would recognize that not everything is happenstance, right? And sometimes it takes years, because it may not be a sequence of events that have happened within a few days or a few weeks or months, might be years, maybe maybe decades, tens of years, maybe generations. But if one stands back and has a look at the holistic picture, then one will see and appreciate that there is a God, and then one needs to internalize it and create that particular relationship.
Rabbi Gavin, thank you very much for talking from the text to answer the question for us. Over to Kudus. So we're going to have the two talks, and then there'll be time for question and answer. So if you want to jot down your questions for Rabbi Gavin, now's the time to refresh your mind. Need the dictaphone. No, the dictaphone.
Anyone hear me at the back? Is that okay? I'll speak a bit louder as well. God's blessed me with a good voice to project. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Respected Chair, Reverend Andrew, Rabbi Gavin Broder, beloved brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Peace and blessings of Allah be upon you. I would like to start by thanking AMSA and JSOC for this opportunity to talk to you about God and about how to find God. In a prophetic tradition, it is related by Abu Huraira that the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, said that whenever a gathering comes together to talk about God, then angels descend on that gathering and they send salutations on that gathering. and Allah's mercy encompasses that gathering. Tranquility descends upon them, and Allah makes a mention of those to those who are close to Him. So I really enjoyed Rabbi Gavin Broder's talk, and I hope that we continue in the future to also have more dialogues like this. I learned a lot from your talk. Thank you for that. So coming to the question of how to find God. When we approach this question on how to find God, or how to do anything for that matter, the very question is actually a methodological one, implying that there is a set way to do something. So, the questions which you naturally come to is, how do you do anything? How do you approach this specific question? And how do I know that I have the right answer? Now I'll try, with whatever limited knowledge that I have, to try and answer these questions the best way possible. So, when you want to ask how to do something, naturally you would ask someone who's done the task before. So if you wanted to know how to read a map, you would ask someone who's proficient at, I don't know, orienteering or something. If you wanted to know how to sow a field, you would go and ask a farmer. And if you wanted to know how to find God, you might find yourself attending a lecture like this. So who do we follow to answer this question? The answer to this is actually, you need to have a bit more of a broader understanding, and I want to try and create that. So when we look throughout human history, not just human history, but history in general, of the entire universe, and we see that there is a gradual trend and a gradual step-by-step progression that the natural world falls under these laws. We also see, when you look at the human race, that trend of evolution. Homer Simpson isn't really the best person to represent mankind, but it's just for illustration purposes, but actually I've got a proper one here. When we look throughout history, we see a trend of evolution. Even in the human history, we see that there's an evolution of mind, of intellect. There's an evolution, a physical evolution, a social evolution, and also a religious evolution. You can see throughout, if you put a timeline in front of you and you put the beginning, the first religion, and then you see the latest religion, there is an improvement every time in the teaching, and it's more of a comprehensive religion that appears. So alongside these religious evolutions appear men of God who are chosen by God Almighty like stars in the night, as guiding stars to follow. So naturally, therefore, if we want to answer the question of how to find God, we need to follow the prophets of God, who claim that they know how to follow God, how to find God. So today, I will try to set out this question pertaining to the Islamic perspective on how to find God, and what befitting place to start in the Holy Qur'an. Allah mentions in the Holy Qur'an, in chapter 2, verse 187, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ الدَّاعِ إِذَا دَعَانِ فَلْيَسْتَجِيبُوا لِي وَلْيُؤْمِنُوا بِي لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْشُدُونَ. And when my servants ask thee about me, say, I am near. I answer the prayer of the supplicant when he prays to me. So they should hearken to me and believe in me, that they may follow the right way. This is such a remarkable verse of the Holy Qur'an. And it pretty much answers all of the questions that you have or probably will have in the quest for God. And we're going to explore this in this segment of the talk. So what I've done, I've kind of like exploded this right there, so you can have a look at it. When I approach this verse, the first thing which strikes out immediately for me is that God's answer is immediate. And when my servants ask about me, say, I am near. And that for me is it's a source of comfort for me. Because instead, if the answer was something like, if my servants ask about me, tell them, it can happen. But this is, even in the Arabic, I want to come to that in a minute, the Arabic portion of this, it's very impacting, it's very powerful in the Arabic language. The Holy Quran emphasizes in many places the linguistic beauty and accuracy of the Quran, with specific reference to the language of Arabic that it has employed to convey the message. So the very first thing we learn is that the response is immediate. Yet it is also long, and I'll come to that afterwards. Then when I approach this verse, okay, this is then when you approach this verse, you see that there is a theme of yearning which is running throughout this entire verse. So when my servants ask about me, so there is something which is happening. My servant is asking you, and you really ask if you have a general and a genuine inquiry and a yearning. I answer the prayer of the supplicant when he prays to me. So there is a yearning there again. So that they should hearken to me and believe in me, that they may follow the right way. This also connotes a yearning. The use of this term connotes that, meaning the term of abd, ibad. Can you see my cursor on there? This word here, ibadi, and it means servant, my servant. And abd actually means servant. And I asked Rabbi Gavin what the word slave also means in Hebrew, and it's ibd. It's similar to abd. I think Hebrew and Arabic are very similar anyway. So this word used abd, when you read the Holy Quran, you will notice that it refers to man as various different things. Sometimes it refers to man as insan, sometimes as abd. And this doesn't actually refer to the person, it refers to the person's spiritual state. So here, the state of someone as an ibad, as a servant, if you think about it, a servant is someone who doesn't really have any say of their own in their own life. Their life is the master's life. So this is quite a powerful word which is used here to connote the state of your soul when you're inquiring about God. It's that you genuinely want to, with your entire being, you want to find out about God. So the use of this term abd connotes a true seeker's whole life is encompassed by the search of God. Also, the use of verbs in the verse pointing to action on part of the seeker is clear and reinforced throughout the verse. So this word here, either and when, connotes the action on part of the believer, a physical action, either. And also we can see it's used here again, either. So these are the three things which we see in this verse. First of all, God's response is immediate, yet long. Don't worry, I'll come to that. The use of when, either, connotes an action on part of the believer. And my servant, ibadi, denoting the state of the person's soul. So perhaps the most profound thing we learn from this verse is that even before we start talking about how to find God, we need to actually ask ourselves, is that what we inherently want to do? Does our lifestyle yearn that we are looking for God? Do we have a genuine desire to know God and find Him? Sometimes we develop a temporary urge to find God through some kind of event that has happened, either a trauma of some sort or anything like that. We temporarily get charged to find God, and we're like, we need to do something about this. But sometimes it happens on a temporary basis. But even then we must ask ourselves if we really want to have a relationship with God. Is it something which our entire life is pointing towards? Most of the time it takes one an entire lifetime to discover that all he was searching for in the outside world was discovered right within him inside. But let's not get too esoteric because we'll go off topic there. So this yearning, this actual desire, is the first step to developing a relationship with God, or how to find God. Is actually ask yourselves, do you want to actually really find God, or is it just something you just read on a flyer and ended up turning up into like a lecture theatre? So this yearning is also a first step. I also want to relate a very beautiful hadith Qudsi, and this is it's a difference between hadith and hadith Qudsi. The simple difference is that hadith Qudsi is attributed directly from God. Well, as a hadith is from the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him. So in a hadith Qudsi, it is related. God says, if my servant approaches me a hand's length, I approach him an arm's length. And if he approaches me an arm's length, I approach him a fathom's length. If my servant approaches me walking, I approach him running. So this yearning of developing a relationship with God is the first step. And once we make that firm resolve in our minds, God is appreciative of that. And that is hinted in this hadith Qudsi that we read. That whenever a person comes one step towards God, God comes and goes, you know what, I'm going to take 2 steps towards you. Take 2 steps towards God, he's like, you know what, I can do better, I'll take about 5 towards you, and so forth. But I think this is a very beautiful saying. So this yearning is constant throughout the seeker's journey. And only when we have this yearning do we truly begin our journey. Lao Tzu, I believe, said that a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. And this step towards God in this lecture will now take form of a discourse by the promised Messiah, peace be upon him. I'm going to mention one of these books which the promised Messiah wrote in this discourse. So they're available to anyone to have a look at the end. I think they're on that table there. So you can have a look at any of these books. If you find like you want to actually take one of those, leave your details there, I'll give it to you free of charge. Is that right? Okay, I'm just saying, just checking. Cool. So coming to what I mentioned before about God is near, yet He's far. The Prophet Messiah, peace be upon him, who is the founder of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, says, if a person wishes that everything should happen at once, that a person should attain to the highest levels of knowledge of God in an instant, that can never be. In this world, everything happens gradually. There is no knowledge or skill that a person does not have to learn with patience and dedication. It is necessary that he should move systematically through the different stages. You see, the farmer has to wait after he has sown the seed. First, he puts one of his dearest things into the ground from where they can easily be picked by animals or swallowed by the earth, or wasted through some other means. But experience gives him comfort that a time will come when these seeds of grain, which have now been entrusted to the earth, will bear result, and in time there will be a green and lush field, and this seed thrust into the ground will turn into his food and livelihood. If a person wishes, the Prophet Messiah here, peace be upon him, tries to make us understand that we are part of the world and we're not miracle workers, so we shouldn't think that once we develop this firm resolve that we want to have a relationship with God, that we want to find God, we shouldn't fool ourselves in thinking, you know what, tomorrow I'm going to become a saint, I'm going to become like this with God. You know, we are subject to the laws of nature, we are physical human beings, and that entails that we also have to go through the same processes that we are subject to in the law of nature, which is gradual progression. It is reported that a man came to the promised Messiah, peace be upon him, in March 1901 from the Gurdaspur district of India. He didn't really have a religion per se, but he always had the desire to do good in his heart. One day he said he was walking along a river, and he immediately felt so much joy in love and in doing some of the most simplest things like walking and talking to people. He found so much joy in doing so. But then that kind of spiritual high that he was on only lasted for a couple of months, after which it disappeared. And he was searching for a long time for something, for that, again, that kind of state that he really loved to do everything. He found pleasure in doing everything to come back. And upon going to see a lot of so-called religious people, he was dissatisfied and they couldn't bring this back. So then he came to the promised Messiah, peace be upon him, to ask him. So the promised Messiah, peace be upon him, said, very unfortunate indeed is the person who sets out in search of the truth and then does not hold positive expectations. Learn at least from the potter and see how much he has to do to make a pot of clay. Watch the laundryman, how much hard work he has to do when he begins to clean dirty and soiled clothes. Sometimes he puts the clothes on the boil. Sometimes he rubs them with soap and through different means draws out the dirt, and at last the clothes come out clean and white. all the dirt that was in them is washed out. If there is need for so much patience for the sake of the removal, for the sake of such inferior things, and how foolish is the person who for the sake of reforming his life desires that they should all be drawn out with a single blow at the heart, and the heart should thereby be cleansed. So the first prerequisite, according to the Prophet ﷺ, peace be upon him, is a firm resolve and determination that you want to achieve or acquire a relationship with God. Now, when we are born with the essence of the divine spirit instilled within us. We see divine attributes which are manifested in a child. For example, some of you, many of you, who would have attended the lecture, I think last week, by Tahir about existence of God. He mentioned that when the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that when a child is born, it displays this yearning towards its mother, and this divine love, it spends its entire life trying to search for it. And this is one of the most remarkable things that we see in nature, this attribute of love being manifested in this way. When the baby cries for her mother's milk, the mother's breast swells up naturally. And this is something, a really remarkable and very profound relationship that we see in nature. So when we're born, we all have the essence of divine spirit instilled in us. This is what I actually like to call our 56K modem. You know, the dial-up connections that we used to have back in the day, and the weird sound it used to make. But I like to think of it as, you know, we were born with a 56K modem connected to God in divine essence. But our job throughout life is to develop a relationship with God so much that this 56K modem upgrades the internet service provider and becomes some kind of fiber optic broadband with, like, you know, global coverage, you know, and so it's kind of a cool, like, analogy or similarity between the spiritual realm and the realm that we live in now, the real world. So in order to acquire this fiber optic broadband connection, we must develop a knowledge of our internet service provider, aka God. In this respect, the Prophet ﷺ writes, "It should be remembered that without true knowledge of God, there can be no progress in love. You see, a man does not love tin or iron as much as he loves copper, and he does not hold copper as dear as he does silver. And gold is even more of an object of desire. Jewels and diamonds are considered to be yet more desirable. What is the reason for this? It is that man receives knowledge about metals, which results in an increase in his desire for some relative to others. In short, the truth is that the cause of progress in love and for the increase in the value of and the desire for love is knowledge. Before a person can desire pleasure and enjoyment, it is necessary that he attains knowledge. However, the most important element on which are based all the others is patience, together with a positive attitude. Until there is patience to an amazing degree, nothing can be achieved. When a person perseveres with untiring patience and strives and struggles in the path of God, then God Almighty, in accordance with His promise, opens the path of guidance for him. As is stated in the Holy Qur'an, "We will surely guide in our ways those who strive after us." That is in chapter 29, verse 70. Those who adopt our way and strive and struggle, we do guide them towards our path, and doors are open for them. It is very true when it is said, "Those who seek shall find." In Islam, we are taught about knowledge of God through learning and experiencing God's attributes, which are mentioned in the Holy Quran. I think there are about 104 or so. Through learning His attributes, our strength and conviction of belief becomes stronger, the more we practice these divine attributes. And I'm just quickly recalling a hadith Qudsi, which is very beautiful in this context, and it actually summarizes it quite well. Because the Holy Prophet said that Allah said, "Ana inda zanni abdi bi, falyazunnu ma sha." I am, this is God saying, I am, meaning I deal with my servants as they think me to deal with them. And this is quite profound, because if you think about it, when you pray to God or you pray to any divine entity, there is no point praying to this divine entity if you do not believe that this entity has the power to respond. That if you do not believe that God can answer your prayers, if you do not believe that God can listen to your prayers in the first place, there is no point. So the very concept of God needs to be established right from the forefront. And that is what the attributes of God in the Holy Quran do so well, and enable us to really have a bigger picture about what God is, how He works through His attributes. However, even when a person does start acquiring divine attributes, even at this stage of one's search for God, we are subject to fall who do not show patience and steadfastness. So the first condition for the search of God is a true desire. This is what the Common Society says. So the first condition for the search of God is a true desire, and the second is to be patiently committed to this search. It is a fact that as one progresses in age, one increases in experience. Does this not necessitate living in the company of a holy person? I have seen many men who in their early years abandon the world and cry out loud, but ultimately their end is such that they are found to be totally engrossed in worldly matters, and in fact become worms of the world. Some trees bear a sort of fruit which is of a temporary nature, as is the case with the mulberry tree. This tree displays an early show of a fruit of all of which falls away, and the real fruit then follows later. Similarly, the desire to search for God also arises temporarily if one does not at this stage show patience and a positive attitude. The temporary desire is not only extinguished, but is obliterated from the heart forever, and turns one into a worm of the world. However, if one works with truth and with a positive attitude, this temporary fervor and thirst for the search of truth does not give rise to a real and true desire which progresses daily, so much so that if there is a mountain of difficulties and tribulations on the way, the true seeker will not care in the least and will continue to progress in his aim. So, the person who at the time of the initial fervor and desire is patient and understands that he has to stay loyal to this feeling for the rest of his life is a person of good fortune. But he who gives up after a few experiments and becomes tired, all that is left for him is that he should go around saying that he has seen many who just talk and found many who were just like shopkeepers, but that he found no one who could show the truth, nor anyone who could lead to God. So, from these extracts of the Promised Messiah which are presented in front of you, we can derive 3 elementary steps to developing a relationship with God. Now, step 1, develop a firm resolve. Be steadfast, be steadfast. Step 2, have positive expectations and be steadfast, and be steadfast. Step 3, acquire knowledge of God, be patient, and yet be steadfast. So, before I close, I would like to share a story relating for the desire for God. And this is extracted from a book which I've forgotten the name of, but it's by, I believe, Bilal Orchard Sahib, who is an Ahmadi. He mentioned in this book a very interesting story. He said that there was a woman once who went to the doctor and said that I've got these problems. And the doctor suggested for her to move to a warmer climate where she can have access to the abundance of health-giving fruits, which will be beneficial for her. So she done so. She moved to a hotter climate, and she had all these fruits around her. But then about half a year passed, and the doctor received the news that she passed away. So the thing over here in this story is that the reason for the lady's death was not because of an absence of the professional help that she needed, the advice, nor was it the absence of the life-giving fruits that she had, but the actual desire to eat those fruits and the desire to become well was absent within that woman, and that's what was the desire. And if you think about it in a spiritual sense, these things are rampant among us today. There are so many religions that are around today, all of which claim that they are the path to God. But which one is the one which is right? That is a personal decision upon you. There is no compulsion in religion, so I'm not going to tell you that Islam is the way, even though I believe that Islam is the way. But we're here on an interfaith thing, so I'm not going to go a bit militant on you.
To conclude.
So I'd like to close with an extract from the Promised Messiah, which is a grand piece of news for seekers after God. Our paradise lies in our God. Our highest delight is in our God, for we have seen him and have found every beauty in him. This wealth is worth procuring, though one might have to lay down one's life to procure it. This ruby is worth purchasing, though one may have to lose oneself to acquire it. O ye who are bereft, run to this fountain and it will satisfy you. It is a fountain of life that will save you. What shall I do? And how shall I impress the hearts with this good news? And by beating what drum shall I make the announcement that this is our God, so that people might hear? What remedy shall I apply to the ears of people, so that they should listen? If you belong to Allah, rest assured that Allah will indeed belong to you. Thank you for listening.
We also have some articles on the existence of God that Imperial, AMSA and others have produced. So if you'd like sort of more in depth on that particular subject, we have some literature there. But for now, I'll pass it on to Andrew.
Well, my thanks to both our speakers. So the floor's open for questions. So who wants to ask? Okay. Blessed are those who go first. Thank you. At the back. I think the microphone's going to come to you.
Regarding the attributes of God, one of his attributes is that he's loving. So my question is that how do both religions propose that? How, in practical way, how would a person go about achieving God's love? And besides prayer, because I know prayer is really important in all religions, but in your everyday life, how would you go, and how can you know that God is pleased with what you're doing and stuff? And can I ask another question?
Okay, so it's a question about how can we know that in our daily life that we are loved by God?
Yeah, I mean, obviously God loves everyone in a general sense, but what actions can you carry out that will increase that?
Okay.
Can I ask another question?
Well, let's start with that one and explore that. I think we'll invite Rabbi Gavin to respond.
Okay, I think that a lot's going to depend on a person's belief. What I try to describe in my talk is that connection that a person has by understanding that there is a God who is interested and is instrumental in what she does as an individual. So it's a matter of belief that God loves me, and therefore whatever I do He's going to love. How do I do that? I suppose different faiths depending on what commandments they have to do in order to create that relationship that they have with God. What is interesting is that very often one looks at instances and says, well, if that happened to me, a tragedy unfortunately, how do we see God's love in that? And the answer from a Jewish perspective is that we don't fully understand what God wants and how He orchestrates the world in which we live. Therefore, within Judaism, when there's something which is obviously a sign of love, something which we are happy about, something we're joyous about, we make a blessing. As well, at the same time within Judaism, if something unfortunate happens, a tragedy happens, we make a blessing as well. It's well known. If a person's relative and not necessarily a relative dies, then we say a blessing. The blessing is the God who is the truthful God, the truthful judge. So God's working from one perspective. His perspective is teaching us that He loves us and He does what is good for us. From our perspective, however, we need to understand that with the same understanding as well, that we don't know sometimes or appreciate that the things that happen to us is God's way of showing His love to us. A small example, if you like. I read recently of a case of somebody who had a meeting early in the morning, and he tried to put it off. He didn't. He had to get to work, And he couldn't avoid it, and the person held him at the meeting longer than he wished to be there. He was obviously devastated until later on we found out, a few minutes later, where he would have been back at the office. That was unfortunately the disaster of the Twin Towers. Now, from his perspective, at 7 o'clock in the morning, he was at a meeting he didn't want to be at, or something happening in his life that he didn't want to do. Well, you know, God, why am I being held up over here? Later on, he gets a different perspectives. So from a Jewish Judaism point of view, it's a matter of an understanding. God loves me. I got to understand that. I may not appreciate that because of the circumstances that happened to me, but that may or may not come to light later on.
We've had one response to your question. You may want to come back, but
I think this is quite an important question because it's a question which I asked myself when I was, and constantly do ask myself now, how can I love God? And the answer to that, which the Promised Messiah, peace be upon him, mentions, is that you can get the love of God just how you get the love of someone else in this world. For example, everyone loves their mum. I love my mum, and everyone loves your mum. I can see everyone smiling when you just thinking of your mum.
it's Mother's Day next week.
Early.
We're all getting in the church.
I should know that. So, if someone does something nice to your mum, out of the blue, even if it's someone who's a total stranger, you will develop a love for that person who's done something to the person that you love the most and has done something good for them. So my answer to your question from the Islamic perspective and coming from what the Prophet Messiah, peace be upon him, said, is that one method which works, because it works in our world and in the spiritual world it should also work, is to send salutations on the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, because he was the most beloved to Allah and to his other prophets. So if you send salutation to those who are beloved to God, then it only follows naturally that God should then develop a love for you. And in this respect, there's a beautiful saying, I cannot recall if it is a hadith, I think it is, Inna Allah jameel wa yuhibbu jamal. Allah is beautiful and He loves beauty. So the reason why I quoted this is because it is like an action point for us to try and acquire divine attributes. One of Allah's attributes is beautiful. So we should try to become beautiful. We should come and dress smartly in a nice suit and a nice tie like this. So you want to try and exhibit godly attributes. That trying to do so is one method whereby we can achieve God's love. And I think anyone, if you see that someone is actively making steps to do something for you and to love you, then you will naturally have an inclination towards that person. So I hope that answers it to some degree.
Can I ask you, are you happy with the responses you've got? Because you had a very practical kind of element to your question.
Yeah, because they mentioned about following the commandments that your religion has. So I think that if you, for example, if you're good to others and if you fulfill the right to God and to others as well.
Okay, thank you. So we'll have another question. Should we take one from this side? Okay, so we'll take the gentleman here in the dark jacket, and then we'll go to the back. And there's one over there as well.
Thank you.
So I think if we can have perhaps shorter responses. I know these are big questions, so it's tempting to have
I think one of the issues that we have nowadays, especially with those who do not believe in God, is the fact that people struggle to find a practical method of experiencing God. And it seems almost as if it is just purely the stories of the past. And the only people that really experienced God were those prophets that are mentioned in the scriptures of the various books of the various religions. So is it not possible for man to actually experience God like the prophets experience? Because it was only those prophets who actually gained a belief in, a total belief and certainty in God through some practical communication with God. So is that not possible now for us as human beings, for us to reach those levels of certainty so that we may become the best of humans?
Those at the back, did you get the question? Did you get the question at the back? Okay, how is it possible, or is it possible to have experiences of God like those of the prophets, so that this is something contemporary, rather than just stories about prophets in the past? I'm roughly paraphrasing your question for the people at the back. But the speakers will get your whole questions. Quickly change it around. Goodness. Over to you.
The answer is yes. It is possible to have a relationship with God, just like prophets had a relationship with God. And in this respect, from an Islamic point of view, I'd like to quote a verse of the Holy Qur'an. I forgot the reference, but just bear with me. It'll probably come later. The verse of the Holy Qur'an is وَمَنْ يُطِعِ اللَّهَ وَالرَّسُولَ فَأُولَٰئِكَ مَعَ الَّذِينَ أَنْعَمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ من النبيين والصديقين والشهداء والصالحين وحسن أولئك رفيقا. And the translation is, and whoever obeys Allah and this messenger, meaning the Holy Prophet Muhammad in this reference, they will be with those whom Allah has bestowed the blessings, His blessings, among the prophets, among the truthful, among the martyrs, and from among the righteous. So this verse actually talks about these 4 different stages of spiritual development that one can traverse through practicing the Islamic injunctions. And this level of prophethood is a spiritual station of prophethood, which is available to acquire to anyone. So anyone in Islam, you can acquire the level that a prophet had with God, that continuous revelation, that friendship, that intimate relationship with God is available through practicing the injunctions of Islam.
Can I ask, would you say that's a particular Ahmadi theological insight, or would all Muslims share that view of revelation and experience of prophethood?
Well, the Ahmadi theology is based entirely on the Holy Qur'an. However, there are other Muslim sects which would beg to differ, simply because they believe that the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the last and final messenger, and after him there is no one who can achieve prophethood. But this verse clearly states that prophethood is actually a spiritual station which is available to anyone who obeys God and His messenger.
And very quickly, because this is a very practical question, another one, what would that spiritual experience of prophethood, what would that be like for somebody? How would it be
ask
described?
someone who hasn't been on that
Okay,
level.
have you ever asked them?
No, I haven't. But I don't know. Well, I can't answer that question. I'm totally unqualified to. I'm not at that level.
Okay. We'll move over. Rabbi Gavin.
I think if I understand the question correctly, it's coming in terms of the type of miracles that, these major miracles that we hear about, or like the ones I referred to, the going out of Egypt, the splitting of the sea, the manna falling down from heaven, water coming from a rock. Maybe they do, maybe they don't happen in that way today. But I think on a personal level, I think these things are happening all the time. And I think that the birth of a child or the growth of a tree, I think is in my opinion no less a miracle at all. So I think that if we look at it from that perspective, or sometimes when, as I referred to earlier as well, when something happens, like 2 people standing next to each other, it affects one person, doesn't affect the other. That too is divinely orchestrated. Going back to the question that was asked earlier, it was divinely orchestrated that God wanted something to happen to this person, but not to that happen. And I would suggest that itself is no less a miracle.
And you shared a story, your story in the hospital was a very personal one, with wanted to interpret that and see that. So we've got one account there. We'll take another question, if that's right. We'll go woman at the back.
My question was, there are people from different religions who say that they could see or experience miracles, which is proof of God's existence. So it is their strength of their religion or encourage them to choose that particular religion. So
A bit louder.
would you justify their claims, and what's your opinion about this?
Can you recap that? Because we didn't hear all of it from the beginning.
There are people from different religions who say they see or experience miracles, and which is proof of the existence of God, and that's encouraged them to choose their particular way of religion. So
Put it off,
Okay.
no, it was working. You put it off.
Thank you. Keep
Yeah,
going.
keep it in your mouth.
there are people from different religions that state that they've seen miracles or experienced them. That's why that's encouraged them to choose their particular religion. And what are your beliefs? What are your opinions about that? What would you say? How would you justify their claims?
Okay. People from different faiths have experience of miracles, and that confirms, or they make their choice of their faith after those miracles. And how do we respond to that?
I think that's fine. The question is how they come on to decide that that's a particular religion or faith that they want to follow because of whatever has happened to them. The question is, when something does happen, whether you turn around and say, well, you know, X has now happened, do I now line up the different religions and see how what happened to me is reflected in each of those religions, and then make a choice? I think it would be a personal approach, whether a person would just take it on, either, if you like, on face value and say, this happened to me, therefore I become a person of faith, and, well, I'll choose this religion as opposed to another religion, or whether they're being a bit of an oxymoron, more scientific about religion, and sort of saying, what happened to me? Is it a doctrine of a particular faith, and therefore I should turn to that one. So I think it is a personal thing. You take what happened and say, therefore I want to follow a particular faith, or you turn around and say, this happened to me, let me now investigate which faith best suits that circumstance that happened to me.
Okay, we'll move over.
I think the answer to this question firstly lies in your definition of a miracle. For me, every day is a miracle. Everything that happens to you is a miracle, because the odds of so many things happening to you, so many things not just happening directly to you, but even indirectly to you, are amazing. The fact that we are alive today is a miracle in itself if you think about it long enough. Also, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the point which I'm trying to say is that most of the time when people convert to a religion based upon a miracle that they see, it generally tends to be on a temporary basis, because that innate desire, the real and essential desire, is not there in the first place. It's just, you see something happening, like a catastrophic event, and you're the only survivor, you might consider that as a miracle, and then hence attribute it to something else. And I think throughout, when you go through your life, religion in general is the movement of your soul, and where your soul finds pleasure and comfort. So throughout your life, on the basis of that comfort of your soul, you make those choices as to what religion to follow. Like I mentioned in my talk, Islam says that there is no compulsion in religion. You're free to choose whatever religion that you feel is most suited to your nature. So, I hope that that's answered it to some degree. Thank you.
I'm struck by the idea of kind of consumer choice. You see the miracle and then decide which religion to go for, and maybe that's more of a contemporary option now that all religions are available to us. And I didn't think I had much of a choice really. It was just Christianity, so I went for that. That's all that I knew. So we'll take the next question. Is going to come from over there. Okay, good. We've got a few. If we can perhaps keep the questions and the answers short, we can move through everybody's question.
Firstly, the verse we were trying to quote was from Surah Disciples, and my question is technically or specifically for Rabbi brothers. What I want to ask is, you mentioned the Passover in your speech. My question is that the God of Judaism, or the overall God, you would say, is he the Alim, which is the God of the Qur'an? One of his attributes is the all-knowing God.
If I understand your question correctly, so briefly put, is God the all-knowing God?
According to the way we believe in the Holy Quran.
I would need to look specifically in how it's understood from that perspective to answer the question that way. But at least from a Jewish point of view, God is all-knowing.
Then my question is, then why didn't he know? It's just a technical question. That on the Passover he needed a red mark. This is the house of a Jewish man.
Good question. Good question.
Digging deep.
Indeed. And that's not the only example. There are other examples as well. And the answer to the question is that God doesn't need a sign. He is all-knowing. He doesn't need a sign. Why did he do it? The usual answer to that is, for this one and for other similar questions, is that God's doing so not because he needs to know, but he wants us to show our allegiance. So he asks us to manifest what we're doing in a particular physical form, so that we identify with what he's doing. He himself doesn't need the sign.
We'll have a question here. Just try it. It's experiential, I think.
Okay. So my question is also about technicality. From a Muslim and from Jewish perspective, does God love everyone, or does he only love someone who follows the particular religion? Thank you.
Okay, we'll go this side first.
To answer your question, I think it's important to divulge into the first opening chapter of the Holy Quran, where God's two primary attributes are mentioned. One of them being Rahman and one of them Rahim. One of them being grace, one of them being mercy. Now, God's grace is also a manifestation of love. Through God's grace, what we mean by that is everything that God has given us without us asking Him. So oxygen, our parents, and so many other things. But God's mercy is also a different type of love. But that love is what a person experiences when he makes steps towards God. And to support this, another place in the Holy Quran mentions that Allah says, وَكَانَ بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ رَحِيمًا, that He is merciful, especially to the believers. So I don't think that this is specifically in reference to a religion per se, but obviously we believe that Islam is the summit of religious evolution. I was mentioning evolution, and Homer Simpson backed me up there. So although Ahmadiyya Muslims, we believe that Islam is the summit of religious evolution. It is the renaissance of evolution per se. So in that context, it is important to believe in Islamic principles, Islamic theology. But the thing about Islam is that it actually encompasses belief in all religions that have gone before. So that's also something which is quite interesting to think about. How that's answered.
So is that a yes, or is that a no? or maybe to her question.
You know, that's a yes.
That's unconditional. Sorry, it is conditional love.
No, sorry, it's not conditioned. But there are different degrees of love which God shows you according to the different state of your soul at the time of your life.
The straight answer is yes. God loves everybody, and God doesn't have any expectation of a person to be Jewish. Right? Which is the prime reason, or one of the reasons, why Judaism does not promote conversion. Right? We don't, or rather missionarize. We don't try to make everybody Jewish. If I believe that Judaism is the one religion, and unless you're adhering to that, God does not favor you, then I would have a duty to go and missionarize and make everybody Jewish in order to bring them under that umbrella. So we do not have that expectation, and therefore we do not missionarize as well. From God's point of view, it's just a different expectation. Different expectation. I'm not going to treat you differently. I'm going to love you as much as everybody else. Judaism will believe that a person we believe in an afterlife, that everybody can have a place in an afterlife, whether they're Jewish or not. And the different expectation, even within Judaism, applies, for example, between men and women. So we have different commandments that apply to men and to women. It's not that God loves men or loves women more than the other. It's just different expectation. Where you are, this is my God's expectation from you. From a Jewish male, I expect you to pray three times a day. For a non-Jewish person, I expect that you should be a good person. And once you do that, you've leveled the bar.
Thank you both. Gentleman there.
So, coming back to the topic of God, suppose I'm not yet convinced that God exists, then the requirement to find God, or one of the requirements, is that I pray to then God will answer in whatever way. But then how am I supposed to pray sincerely if I don't yet believe, if I'm not yet convinced of God? So is there a way to make that first step where I'm then happy and convinced to go on the journey to find God?
Thank you.
You're asking a very difficult question. Because you are asking a question, first of all, about belief. And the definition of belief is to believe in something, and not something which can be proven. And that's why I would suggest, going back to what I said earlier, that if you're fortunate enough to be able to look over a period of your life, or an instant in somebody's life, and to say that this is not just a natural occurrence, like the parables that I offered you, then that can perhaps bring the person a little bit closer. But I think that initially the person needs to have that desire, that want. I'm searching for something. Where do I find my happiness? Somebody suggested that faith might be the answer. Then I think you need to explore the faith and see the tenets of the faith, the doctrines, and how it would affect me as an individual. It is going to boil down to belief. But I think that if you look at nature today, and if you look at just the makeup of man, the brain, and the growth, and how leaves fall off a tree, and how that doesn't affect the tree, and the tree only grows from it, etc., etc. I think from that perspective, I think one can get a little bit closer.
Sounds like a very reflective process going alongside some early hesitant praying, maybe.
I agree with Rabbi Gavin, who said that the initial thing is to create the desire. One thing which I want to mention, which is quite profound, which you see in the Holy Qur'an, is a sort of a dialogue which takes place between God and Prophet Abraham. Prophet Abraham asks God, "How do I revive the dead?" And then God asks him back, "Do you not believe?" And then Abraham said, yes, I do, but I want to know so that I can satisfy my heart. The question here is, you see something happening that God is, having a conversation with Abraham. That is revelation. So even at that stage, if Abraham, he was still a little bit shaky about his belief, it's so. Firstly, it's not something which you should be worried about. It's something which you should understand as one of the levels, one of the gradual progressions of man in the search for God. Also, the Holy Quran describes God. The very first attribute of God that is mentioned in the Holy Quran is Rabb. And that in Arabic lexicon connotes someone who, actually in Arabic there's a prayer in the Holy Quran as well for parents. And parents have been described by, in this verse, Rabb as well. A Rabb means someone who is a Lord, who's someone who takes you from stage to stage. And then also someone who doesn't just show you the way to go, but he goes along with you on that way. And then not just stopping there, he takes you to your final destination. So in that context, this, as I said, agree with Rabbi Yavin, that it's a stage in its progress. And also, to finish off, you shouldn't be asking us this, you should ask God himself. That's the best thing, that's the beauty of it, I think. It's like, God, I know that there's something there, give me some kind of sign. And I think the patience should show you the answer there.
There was a question right at the back. You still want to ask? Oh, it's okay. Well, right at the back on the right-hand side there.
I just wanted to clarify from the Jewish perspective whether hell was eternal and whether only Jewish people can go to heaven.
Yes, we do believe. In fact, we say that this world is just a corridor to the next world, and our duty in this world is to do the will of God in order to prepare ourselves for the world to come. And yes, we do believe in reward and punishment, and in the same way that we believe in heaven, we believe that there's a hotter place elsewhere.
Can I just ask, is there in the West, if you like, the images of hell are very Christian. Could you just, I don't really want to explore hell, but I just want to sort of practice, do you mean, can you give me a kind of Jewish picture of hell? It's different from the kind of the Bosch and the one that we've got in Western culture. That it's very Christian. I mean,
there is a story of an individual who had a glance, a picture of both heaven and hell, and he had a great difficulty because both places there was a banquet that was put before all the people, and in heaven everybody looked content and happy, and in hell they didn't, and he couldn't quite understand what the difference was until somebody explained to him, well, look very carefully. If you'll notice that they're all both sitting, in both cases, they're sitting at a banquet, but they're also using very long cutlery. And they can't, with their own cutlery, they just can't feed themselves. In heaven, they're spoon feeding the person opposite them, whereas in hell, they're trying to feed themselves and they're not getting anywhere. I think on a more serious note, that the idea is that everybody one day will get to heaven. And sometimes they need to purge themselves of sins or things which they've done in the past. And therefore they do go through a painful experience, whatever that is, whether it's heat or whatever the case might be, where they purge themselves of the sins that they've done and then merit to go to heaven afterwards.
thank you very much. But actually it was a question to Rabbi about the Jewish sense of hell. So can we just have a show of hands for the last questions, and we'll work our way through. The people that haven't asked questions, okay, there's one there, and there's one at the front, and there's a second one there. Well, we're not sure about the second one, but the person just here, the green.
I would like to know what you think the purpose is of finding God.
Purpose of finding God. We'll go to that.
The purpose of finding is quite a deep and profound question. It might take a bit longer to answer, but in short, I would say that the purpose of finding God is to perfect our beings, ourselves, us as human beings, to make us into perfect beings. So that's a short answer. If I was to expand any more, I think it would take a very long time.
To perfect ourselves as human beings. Okay. Such a short challenge.
Question. I think that the main factor, as I would see it, is that God wants the world to run on a particular moral standard, which He sets. I think us as individuals have all got different definitions of what we think is moral, what we think is correct, and mine will differ from somebody else's, just like theirs may differ from a third person. So God wanted, He constructed the world, He wanted it to run in a particular way. The Bible itself tells us the incident of Sodom and Gomorrah, where individuals weren't behaving the way that God wanted them to behave, wanted the world to run, and He therefore destroyed that city. In the time of the flood, earlier in the Bible, again, people weren't behaving in a moral way. God destroyed the world. So personally, from me as an individual, the reason to find God is to find a correct moral standard in which to live my life, and also that the byproduct will be to have happiness and contentment.
One question there.
Okay, this is a question really from Robert. I wonder, how do you rationalize the fact that, you had the 12 tribes of Israel, and 10 of them were lost? And I don't know whether you know, but a lot of us who were from India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, etc., we were actually descendants from those Israelite tribes. I mean, myself, I have descendancy from the tribe of Joseph. There's various other tribes as well. Okay, so how do you reconcile the fact that so many, approximately over 80% of the original Jewish stock essentially has become Muslim? I'm not sort of talking about the quality of them or anything like that, but how from a Jewish perspective, do you actually rationalize the fact that, this thing has happened, and yet, the vast majority of the Jewish people essentially are lost, from the perspective of Judaism? Please.
Difficult questions to answer on one foot in a brief amount of time. I think essentially one needs to look back to the text to see what happened, why this was broken off, why the tribes were lost, what was the reason behind them, and what was the result afterwards. That which people, from a different perspective, that which people break away from the faith, it's a different thing to what you're describing. That which people break away from the faith or break away from the people is perhaps a natural thing. It is something which might happen because of an incident which happened, if we look back historically, or because of a divergence of opinion. Once that happens, however, that break therefore separates one from the other. For example, if you talk about a similar type of circumstance, we have a tradition that in the plague of darkness, once again they came back to Passover, that in the plague of darkness, the vast majority of people died as well. And they say that one of the reasons that they had the darkness was that nobody would sort of actually see that. Right? So therefore, that historically, that would have people either died or broken or gone away from the faith is not an unusual circumstance.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
I'm looking really for a theological answer, really, from a perspective of pure theology. You know, I mean, what exactly is going on, as it were, with Judaism? I mean, how do they rationalize the fact that this has obviously happened?
I don't have a problem with rationalizing it. In the same way that I don't have a problem if I may not agree with it, but I don't think I have a problem if an individual, and it happens all the time, says that I don't want to adhere to the faith anymore, or I want to go to a different religion, or I don't want to have any religion for that matter. You know, I don't agree with it. I think it's unfortunate. I think they're losing out on finding God and everything that goes together with it. But theologically, I don't have a difficulty with individuals. And individuals want to make that choice. If it's historically and for whatever reasons God had in mind that should be, I don't think it's vastly different.
Thank you. There was a question right at the back, up there.
Can a person have a relationship with God without having a religion, and if yes, how?
So can you have a relationship with God without having a religion? And if yes, how?
The thing is, everyone has a relationship with God no matter what, since they're born until they die. The thing is, they just have a different degree of a relationship with God. And religion has actually come throughout the ages to assist man to perfect his being and to enable him to acquire the purpose by which he was created. It was to put on divine attributes. I want to quote Ibn Arabi. He actually mentioned something quite profound. I will paraphrase it because I can't remember the exact quote, it's quite long. He mentions in Futuhat al-Makkiyah, the Meccan revelations, that when a child is born, it goes through certain veils of light and certain veils of darkness. And these veils of light and these veils of darkness represent earthly qualities and divine qualities. And he says that for every dark veil he passes through, he puts off the divine quality. And for every veil of light he goes through, he puts on an earthly quality. And thus the child is born weeping, because it knows its separation from the divine essence, from God. And this is also the reason why man is called insan in the Qur'an, which is from nisyan, which means to forget. So I think that's one aspect. I just wanted to quote it because it really stuck with me when I read it, to do with creating a relationship with God. Yeah. I don't think that answers your question.
So it sounded like yes, that everybody's got an inherent human relationship with God, although spiritual level.
And what was the second half of your question? And how can they have a relationship with God? Well, I think first and foremost, the quintessential thing about having a relationship with God is about being honest. If you're not honest with yourself and you don't actually being genuine to yourself, not like fooling yourself, like, you know what, I want a relationship with God, so I'm going to go to the mosque and I'm going to pray, but it will do you no benefit. The Prophet says that if your first step is wrong, then how can you think that your last step will lead to God? So initially what is important to develop a relationship with God is being genuine and truthful and honest. This is one of the great qualities of the Holy Prophet, who is known to be Sadiq, truthful.
Thank you.
I would say that by definition, you're probably creating just another religion. And I don't think a relationship with God, by definition, must mean that you've got that relationship. You've got that relationship, you must be doing what He's expecting from you. So, if your relationship is like, it sounds like somebody who deeply wants a relationship but just doesn't know how to get that relationship. Because if you've got that relationship, then it must turn around like any friendship, really. So what are our expectations one to the other? And I think that a person would be falling far short by saying, I want a relationship with God because I think there's a higher being, and I think that I want His love and protection, and at the same time saying, I want it on my terms. In other words, you know, I don't want to have to be confined with particular laws that is said in God's name. So I would say that, you know, that maybe that is some sort of, they call it a religion or a non-religion if you like, but I think the definition of a religion must mean that you create a relationship with God, and then the different faiths will have their own particular relationship with the way that they create that.
The last question is Bill.
So we talked a lot about how to find God and what to do within yourself to find God. I mean, sort of as a logical progression from that is, how can God contact you, is my question really. Which in essence is, what do the two faiths say about revelation? Because I know even in the story of Joseph when he was in the prison, the people came with him, they had true dreams, and Joseph interpreted them. Does revelation continue? And can you actually have a personal living relationship with a living God? So, you know, expand upon by different things.
We'll go over.
There's a verse in the Holy Quran which actually says this, correct me if I'm wrong, Allahu Bari wa... Actually, I forgot it. I don't want to misquote the Quran. Allah is free from everything. He doesn't need anything himself. But we are the ones, Antumul Fuqara, you are the ones who need him. So God is self-subsisting. He is eternal. He's living. He doesn't really need us. In a way, in that essence, in that context, you can say that, you know, there is no real reason why God should contact us in the first place in that context, because He doesn't need to contact us. But we are the ones that need to contact Him. We are the ones through which, or He is the one through which our establishing a relationship will eventually lead us to fulfill the purpose of our lives. And with regards to revelation, God mentions in the Holy Quran that He gave revelation to the bee to build trees, you know, in the forests, and build houses in the forests and trees. So revelation is something which everyone is able to achieve this level of revelation, this level of talking with God, conversing with God, sharing a joke in prayer with God, which is what I've done once. We had good laugh together. But it all depends upon your own idea of God. Who do you and how do you conceive God to be? Do you conceive God to be someone who is not like, you know, like your enemy, is not like your best friend? If you consider God to be like a warm bosom friend, someone who you turn to in every sphere of life, who you talk to 24/7. You know, people on their DVs nowadays, they tell their friends everything. But you talk to God as much as you talk to people on social networking and so on and so forth. So it all depends upon your approach to God.
Revelation, does that continue?
Yes, the Holy Quran says the revelation does continue, and it will continue. Yes.
Not seen into it. Okay, so the question is, how can God contact us, and is there continual revelation? And this is the final response.
The Jewish belief is that we don't have prophecy in the same way that we did generations ago. So there's nobody that we believe that can turn around and say, God has spoken to me and given me a message that I need to promulgate, I need to tell over to other people. So I think very much along what's just been said, it is more of a reaction. I understand is that God says, you reach out to me and I'll open up to you with widespread arms. As far as revelation, you know, there's no direct revelation as such. But at the same time, the events in our lives should be what is speaking to us. That God is speaking to us through the events that happen in our lives. And I have mentioned really a number of times this evening. You know, there are those really quite open miracles that are quite evident to us.
I'd like to thank you for listening and for asking sort of wide range of questions, and I'd like to thank the panelists for their responses. From my view, it's great to hear two people unpacking and thinking and sharing their faith tradition, to hear the stories of the God and the child on the father's shoulders, and the revelation of the bee. You can only hear these stories if you're in the presence of somebody who can tell them, and who knows them, who feels them, and is living the faith. So thank you very much for those examples and for everything else that you've said. There are some refreshments, so if you want to follow on your unanswered questions, then you can.
So thank you everyone for coming. I'd first like to, of course, thank our guests, Rabbi Gavin Brolin for an excellent session, and likewise with Zelda who's happened. I'd also like to thank Reverend Willson for helping us organise these, and the whole chaplaincy team, as well as the Jewish Society, Noah, Andrea, and the rest. So just a few notices. We have these, Imperial, we have interfaith dialogue sessions. We're going to run them over the next, Interfaith is going to run them over the next 3 weeks, on Wednesdays, 1 to 3 p.m. The first one is on religion and science. And what we have now is, as I said at the beginning, parchment and refreshments, which really do need to go. So please dig in, we'll bring some up to the top as well. So with that, thank you very much for coming, and hope you see you at future Interfaith events. Thank you.
Concerned about